Um, there has been some talk of maybe boycotting the film. Some people are saying that the Dahomey Empire was involved in the slave trade in as much that they captured Africans and sold them to primarily the Portuguese. Well, that much is true. There were many African kingdoms involved in the sale of their brothers and sisters into slavery. But is that a reason to boycott the movie? The reality is that it is part of our history. Some history is painful, some history is ugly, but it is our history and we cannot ignore it. It makes us who we are. So I think that it is sort of, well, downright foolish to boycott this movie. This movie is very well made, an all black cast. It seems that whenever we have a movie that comes out that is a predominantly black cast, that there is some sort of drama concerning that movie. And I think that we need to go out and support this movie. You know, we're going to stand online for hours to vote for people who won't do anything to address the needs of the black community. And certainly we can go out and support this movie and talk about our history in this country and around the world. But I digress. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about Africa prior to the arrival of the Europeans. What was Africa like before Christianity? So joining me to talk about that is someone who is no stranger to Gynesis Radio, who actually has her own show on the Gynesis Radio Network, and that is Kwanzaa Mama. Kwanzaa Mama, you there with us?
Yes, I am.
Hotep?
Hotep. How are you?
I'm so well, thank you, my sister. How are you?
I'm doing well as also.
Very
sleepy. I'm a little sleepy because I didn't sleep all night, but I'm all right.
You know, sis, I know how that is. Some nights you just have those sleepless nights where your mind says go to sleep, but your body says something completely different.
Yeah.
So now, have you seen the movie, The Woman King?
I have not. I just saw the trailer, and the power for me is the feminine energy, as well as the complexion of the people.
Right.
Now, I don't hear anybody going out and protesting all this nonsense that the box office is putting out all the time. Okay,
Right.
nobody's boycotts Spider-Man, nobody boycotts Tarzan, nobody boycotts all these nonsense movies that are messing with our children's minds subliminally. But the minute something that is an empowering movie, notwithstanding that bit of history, right? So the dominant culture, which actually led the enslavement of African people, you could go see their stuff, but you can't go see something because it mentions these. Now, these people, most of these people in this movie are African Americans, right? Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay.
African Americans and Africans, you know, throughout the diaspora.
Yes, I did hear that they went into the continent. Do you all understand how powerful that is? Do you understand how powerful that is, that African Americans from the diasporic African people working with Africans on the continent? Do you see why people are afraid and they want to start some mess?
Well, you know what? I think that people miss the messages in many movies, right?
Okay.
We tend to focus on the action scenes and we miss those little bits of powerful information, right? And, you know,
in fact, we don't know it. You know, we're not familiar with our ancient history. Let me not say we. Many people are not familiar with our ancient history. And so the connections, the mind movie is different from me watching that and you watching that than the average guy watching that. The mind movie is very different because the information that you have makes you see it differently, hear it differently, interpret it differently. So yeah, I can understand why some people might be upset. And then you mentioned something about um, people on the ground in Africa enslaving their own. Um, it was it wasn't. It was a small group of greedy Africans who colluded, and they had to make money. Okay, that was their way to make money. That was how they got wealthy. That was how they sold people who they despised or wanted to get rid of. And so that's why you hear people saying we come from kings and queens, because if I wanted to take over your throne, I could drug you and your children and then drag you somewhere and sell you. And we'll never hear from you again. So nobody's there to compete with me for the throne because I'm greedy. And so some people come from kings and queens, but not everybody. everybody is not from the same bloodline, so that's impossible for everybody to come from kings and queens. But some people did, and because of the disconnect with the lineage, and the culture and the history, folks, all of us just claim it, and that's all right. We can do that, and we should do that.
Well, I'll tell you something, right? I think that as it relates to the transatlantic slave trade, I do not believe that those who sold their enemies into slavery realized that they were going to be transported around the world. I don't think that was part of the African concept and understanding, right? That this was a global trade that would export Africans all around the world. However,
and the treatment of the people, their idea of slavery was very different.
Right. And I'll tell you something, right? For people in this country and around the world who are critical of this film, we have to keep in mind, again, the people that sold their brothers and sisters were not aware of the treatment and that they would be sold around the world. However, we've had people in this country who collaborated with the federal government, who worked to bring down groups like the Black Panthers and other organizations within this country. So for us to talk about our ancestors and what they did, what about what we're doing to this very day? We still have people who collaborate against the Black community and who work against us in our rise to power. So, I mean, if we're going to talk about this, let's talk about what happened then, and let's talk about what's happening now.
But it's a humanity. I mean, that's humanity. There's always somebody who's going to go against the grain. There's always somebody who's going to collude because they feel that they're going to get something, or they're greedy, they're short-sighted, they're misinformed, whatever the excuse. There's always going to be someone or some small group of people, because usually it's not the majority, and even with the European slave trade, because that's what I call it. I don't call it the African slave trade. I call it European slave because it was led by Europeans. It wasn't led by Africans. So, and even with the European slave trade to the diasporic Africans here, it was not all Europeans. You understand what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
So it's not all of any of the groups that were involved. There were people who of European ancestry who were dead set against it, lost their lives fighting against it. So I'm just saying, the reactionary thing, what they want you to do is react and become fearful and negative. Instead of, if you watch that movie, if you had a little bit of your history under your belt and you watch that movie from that perspective, and then you watch that movie to the power of the gender and the melanated people, you would see a different movie. Just saying.
Well, you know what? Yes, all that you said is very much true. But for whether you think of it in terms of the transatlantic slave trade or the European slave trade, most historians would say that this trade began around the 15th century with the Portuguese, when they came down the west coast of what they call Guinea and began to trade with the empires along the west coast of Africa. But prior to the arrival of the Portuguese and the other Europeans that would follow them, what I wanted to get in today was a little bit of our history prior to the advent of the European. Because for us in this country and around the world, most of us connect Christianity, at least the European brand of Christianity, with our history. And
very different.
Yes, and you know what? Christianity only is a very, very brief portion of African history. Now, yes, Christianity was practiced in Africa.
And it wasn't called Christianity.
Right. It was practiced in Africa prior to the Europeans, because the oldest church is the Ethiopian Coptic Church, at least a Christian church. But prior to that, what sort of spiritual practice? Well, first, let me ask this question. In Africa, did we have what will be called a religion?
From my perspective, no. We had a way of life. Everything was spirit was attached to everything. Spirit was not disconnected from anything in our lives. There was a time of day that we bathed, what is it? I think it was 7 times a day. We got to, and we honored different energies throughout the day. If you wanted to pick a fruit, you would bless the spirit of the tree and thank the tree for giving you the fruit. That spirituality was intertwined into every aspect of the society. And it was easy to do that because everybody, well, not everybody, most of the people were on the same page.
Right.
So when you're in a society like that where, okay, I was born and this is what we do, this is our custom, this is our tradition, this is how we do that, this is what we do at this time of day, it's easy to maintain that energy.
Right.
When you have outsiders come in and what they're looking at is the jewelry you have on that they want to steal, and they're looking at other things that they can confiscate, and they're not paying attention to your spirituality, and then they go about doing some of the nasty stuff they did in their culture, then you have chaos.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what they confiscated, because if you look at the film, right, you see certain aspects of spirituality, and it seems to me that the origin of the major religions, all of them, I'm talking Christianity, Judaism, I'm talking Islam, I'm even talking about the Hindu religion. It seems that the origin is based on the original spiritual system of Kemet, what the Greeks called Egypt. Would you agree with that?
Of course it is. It's based on the 42 laws of Ma'at, of which when folks that came amongst could not seem to adhere to 42, it said, okay, yeah, for you to stay amongst us, you have to live by these 10. And when they couldn't live by those 10, they were kicked out.
So,
but we have 42 laws. I used to know it by heart, and I don't know it by heart now. A few of them, this society today would not want people to know about, because then they would see how far away from, how close to chaos they are, and how they create chaos in their own lives by not living in balance. And Ma'at means balance, truth, justice, reciprocity, and she holds a scale. in her hands, and on one side of the scale is a feather. Now, this is the just like today's Christian people have theories. Well, this is a lesson that is taught in pictographs and living color. So the lesson is your heart has to be as light as that feather. So you cannot engage in behaviors such as greed, murder, theft, anger. Being angry all the time is against spirit, jealousy, those kinds of negative emotions. If you engage in them and you try to weigh your heart against that feather, boom. Now, the idea is that it should be balanced. Your heart should be as the feather.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Ma'at.
Ma'at?
Because, yes. Now, you said that Ma'at represents, amongst other things, justice. And isn't it ironic that in this country, the symbol of justice is a woman with a scale?
Yeah, that's
clearly
the same thing.
It's plagiarized from Ma'at and
Exactly.
the Kemetic spiritual system.
Yeah, our ancient system. Tony Browder, what's the name of his book? No, Indus Kemet Kush wrote a book called What They Never Told You in History Class.
Mm-hmm.
That's an easy book to read, and it's short. It's very short chapters, and then he gives you a list of other books to read. So that's a great book to read if you don't like to read a lot.
Right.
It's a good start. He will give you excerpts of things. It's a very good start. And then you look up Tony Browder. And his daughter wrote books as well. So those are two authors that are easy to read. And what Tony Browder did in one of his books was he did a side by side. And he did the 42 laws of Ma'at, and he did the 10 commandments. And then he did another side by side of other things. He did side by side of a bunch of things so that you could clearly see the connection, the correlation.
Well, let me ask you this.
Mm-hmm.
So for the Christian world, the Bible...
Today's Christian world. Yeah, today's Christian world.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
The Bible, which was commissioned by King James, is viewed as being the absolute word of God. However, based on what's written in the Bible, where do you think, I'm sure, let me rephrase that, where did they get this information from to write it down in the Bible?
Well, I'm just going to say, as a person who reads well and likes to read, I read differently.
Mm-hmm.
So people who don't read well, they will tend to just regurgitate the little piece that was pulled out and taught to them. And so they just memorized the little piece and they didn't read the context of it. So when I was a little girl, I used to get pinched a lot because I would ask questions that pissed off my elders. It pissed off my elders because, of course, the reason they were really pissed off was because they didn't have the answer, right?
Right.
But and after I figured that out, I didn't get upset when they pinched me anymore because I'm like, I'm just asking, But if you look at many aspects of what people say God said, and God said this, and God said that, and God said this, and God told us to do this and that. I want you to go read again and see why is it Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, just deductive reasoning and critical thinking skill. If that's the book of Mark, then who was Mark? And who was Matthew? And what were they about? And if that's their book, then they're the ones talking. That's how I interpreted it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you look at the piece that they love to spout a lot, which grates my nerves, about the virtuous woman. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying some of those things are not a good thing for a woman to be, and a man too. A man should also be that, okay? Because that's a whole being and a whole, a balanced whole being. However, God wasn't talking. It was a mother talking to her son who was about to become a king and about to take a wife as to what kind of woman she wanted him to bring home to her. God didn't say every woman had to be that. Now, some of it, I'm not saying it's not a good thing to aspire to be, but the best thing that I think women can be are critical thinkers, reasonable people.
Well, in looking at some of the books written by Professor John Henry Clark, may he rest amongst the ancestors, he talked about when the Europeans first arrived into the continent of Africa, and they entered.
I'm starting not to hear you well. Can you speak up a little bit, please? I'm sorry for interrupting.
Sure. When they first arrived into Kemet, and I'm talking about Alexander, they say historically that Alexander burned the libraries.
Yes, he did.
However, according to Dr. Clark, he first took the information out of the libraries, transported the information back to Greece, where the information was rewritten. And now the author, who may have been, say, Imhotep, it is now written under the name of Aristotle. So some of this spiritual system, of course, taken out of Africa, plagiarized, rewritten, and some of this information found its way into the modern day Bible.
Of course,
would you
of course.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, yes. One of the best classes I took in college was American art history. And the next best class I took was philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
And those two classes opened my eyes to a lot. And in philosophy, they were talking about the origins of, let's say, the chocolate hearts and Valentine's and who is Saint Valentine. We talked about that. We talked about is it Plato? Was Plato the one that had to drink poison?
That was Socrates.
I think so. Oh, Socrates, yes. Yes. That guy. I told you my brain is muddled. My brain has been muddled for the past 2 years. So the reason Socrates was killed was because he was correcting. He had gone to those Black people in Egypt and learned all this foreign stuff and is bringing it back, and all these people are following him. He had initiates. And that's the reason that he was killed, because it was against the rules. They wanted him to take it back, denounce it, and say that he was not telling the truth. And he refused and gladly drank the poison to prove a point, and then became a martyr. But what was he teaching? He was teaching to live in balance, be truthful, be just, right? Don't harm children. Okay? Don't harm animals. Do not misuse your sexual energy. And the list goes on and on. But if you listen to the ones I just said, you could see why people don't want you to know the others, other 30. Absolutely. You can see why people don't want you to hear the other 30. They only want you to know those 10, which most people can't even live by those 10. So just saying, the African origins of those things is clear. So when Wallace E. Budge so-called translated and named a book that he put together by copying things off of the temple walls, and he called it the Egyptian Book of the Dead.
Mm-hmm.
And he claimed that it was a direct translation from the temple walls. But as people got to learn more and got to read it for themselves, they said, wait a minute, that's not what that says. It says the book of coming forth today from night. Now, how did the Book of the Dead get translated from that? Well, he was calling it the Book of the Dead because, of course, it sensationalizes the idea, and people will buy it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, well, certain people will buy it, and then the other people won't want any parts of it, especially the people who it's about won't want any parts of it because they're scared of the dead. They don't want no parts of the dead. Nope,
Right.
Yeah. So they don't even know that that book is about their ancestors. They don't even know that that book belongs to them, and that those 42 laws, if they live by them, would save their lives. They have no clue.
So, if you look at Africa prior to, I guess, about the 15th century, and we're talking going back into antiquity, you see that there were very powerful empires on the continent of Africa, thriving empires that had trade routes that stretched across the Atlantic, across the Pacific, and throughout all of Africa into Europe and also Asia. Well, after the European, you see that Africa went into a complete state of collapse. Economically, socially, morally, and of course, a complete loss of resources.
Chaos.
Right. And it seems that, and there's a proverb that said, when the Europeans came, they had the Bible and we had the land. Well, they taught us to pray with our eyes closed. And when we opened our eyes, we had the Bible and they had the land. And it seems as if now we are almost grateful to give them the land because we are under the belief that at some point, after we die, of course, their God will lift us up into a place called heaven, and we will enjoy the fruits of our labor, but only after we are dead. So in the Kemetic spiritual system, or the spiritual system of ancient Egypt, was there a concept of heaven?
Heaven is where you live. You are to leave wherever you are better than you met it, and you're supposed to live a life that's balanced, and you're supposed to you're supposed to help your neighbor, you're supposed to help, you're supposed to take care of the land, you're supposed to create heaven on earth, which is why you see all those so many structures that they can't figure out how they built them to this day. And before those, there was the land where, of course, it flooded, and that part of Africa, it flooded at certain times of the year. But the people always knew when the floods were coming, and they moved to higher ground. And when the waters receded, they came back. And then now you have all the silt, and the land is rich, and so they could grow anything in there. So they were living in heaven. They had an abundance of crops. They had an abundance of water. So they were living in they were living in heaven. That was their heaven. And heaven is, heaven is based on your definition of what you value and how it makes you feel. When you eat something, this is heavenly, right? We say that, right? Yeah. Oh, girl, look at that over there. That's heaven. You know what the concept of heaven is, and you can understand that are people who are highly spiritual and live their lives every day in a spiritual manner and respects every living thing, right? You can imagine what their heaven was like,
Well,
what they created.
Well, in the Kemetic spiritual system, the ancestors believed in an afterlife. However, their belief was that they would return.
Yes.
Right? Not necessarily to a place somewhere beyond the clouds, but they would return right here on Earth.
Yes, and that's why certain people in Africa still today talk about the ancestors, and they watch the child for when the baby is born. They watch the child for a while to see who came back.
Okay.
So I mean, and listen, don't get spooky on me, you folks out there. You do it all the time. You say, "Oh, he looked at me just now, and I just saw Uncle John staring at me," right? Or, "Oh, look at her! Look at how she does that just like my mom used to do." So you sort of believe that, right?
Absolutely.
You have experienced that. You've seen where people have come back and just did everything just like somebody who passed in their family.
That does happen.
Yeah, and so how did they get that information? How did they get that knowledge? Where did they learn that from? How did they learn to do this with their hair? How would they know that? They never saw that person, right?
Absolutely.
So yeah, that's what, and that's why in ancient times they didn't name the baby until they observed the baby and could sort of see what attributes the baby was exhibiting, etc. And they would also sometimes name the baby what they wanted the baby to aspire to being, But yeah, we definitely believed in our ancestors returning, and that's one of the reasons also that the ancestors were buried. Our family members were buried close to us. We didn't have, in ancient times, we didn't have a cemetery where you go bury your people in a cemetery with other people. You buried your family close to you because they're your ancestors. And even though, yes, we know the concept, the body is gone. The body's not the thing. The soul is the ba. Or the ancient, the ka and the ba were very important in ancient time. Your spirit and your soul. We understand that, but it's the concept is sound in that we feel connected to them. They're here with us. We can go sit and people do that to this day. Why do you go to the cemetery and sit and talk to your mama? And why do you go to the cemetery and pour drinks for your homies? And why do you say you don't believe it, but you do it all the time?
Yeah, we do. And I guess it's not realizing the spiritual connection we have to our ancestors. I mean, it is in our DNA. Some of the things we do, not realizing that a lot of these traditions came with us across the Atlantic from our
many
homes.
So many.
We're not just talking about our custom traditions, also the foods we eat. But these are all things that unfortunately we have forgotten, and we have intertwined so much of the Eurocentric view of ourselves and the world into how we think. So because of that, I think that could be one of the multiple reasons why we reject films like, The Woman King. And if you
when you're taught to hate women, and you're taught that women are not worth anything, and you're taught that, and then they had the nerve to call her a king on top of that, and then I could just see people like, what is that?
Well, I think that is a part of another aspect of the history of the European that was not part of the African tradition, because we know throughout our history on the continent, we had many women who led civilizations.
Well,
And
let me go back to antiquity. Let's go back to antiquity.
okay.
There was no such thing as gender bias in our antiquity.
Mm-hmm.
The rule was whoever does it best does it. I'm going to say that again. The rule was whoever does it best does it. Did it say which girl does it best or which man does it best? No, whoever. So one of the things that some Greeks and other kinds of people who came to visit us would get upset about was the way that the women moved about society. The women were pleading law. The women were ironsmiths. The women they weren't in the house barefoot and pregnant, cooking and cleaning and washing clothes. They actually had intelligence and actually were encouraged to exhibit their intelligence. And it was a different world for them. And they couldn't understand it. So for them, that means that those ancient people were savage because they allowed the women to to have authority. That makes them savage.
Well, there was definitely a switch, because according to my reading of Kemetic history, in order for any man to ascend to the throne of
Yes.
Kemet, he had to have in his procession to the throne, his placenta, to prove not who his father was, but who his mother was, because the line of ascendancy was matrilineal as opposed to being patrilineal, which is something
exactly.
This switch apparently took place with the advent of Europeans coming into the continent.
Yeah, the patriarchal system is very young. If you talk to the people who call themselves Jewish today, and you talk to them and you see that their lineage was matrilineal up until recently, I understand. But the okay, I'm going to say something that might offend some people, but you know how African Americans have this saying, "Mama's baby, daddy's maybe."
Yes.
Well, that might not have been their reasoning for it in ancient times, but you can clearly see the child growing in the womb, and you know that that's coming from that woman in those days, because in those days they didn't have surrogacy and all of that. So today, I guess the narrative would be different today. But back then, the mother pushing the child forth, and so that bloodline. You know that bloodline for sure, right? And then there was polyandry, a system of marriage that people don't like to talk about because it means a woman can have more than one husband. And frown on that. And I was asked one time, how will we know whose baby it is? And I said, just like with the women, it's our baby. You know, the concept back then wasn't that this is your baby and that's my baby and this is your baby. And the concept was all these children belong to all of us. Right? The woman whose body the child came out of didn't say, well, that's my child, don't touch my child, don't talk to my child. No, it was like all of us take care of all the children, which is where you got that adage, it takes the whole village to raise a child. And I'm correcting it. It didn't say it takes a village. It says it takes the whole village to raise a child. Right? And so you put all of that together and you see that it did not behooved male energies who wanted to control wealth and didn't want to do the heavy lifting. They wanted some people to cook for them, clean for them, push out babies for them, take care of their every need. And if you want that, what do you have to do to get that and to get people to submit to that? Get the feminine energies to submit to that. What do you have to do? Now you have to exhort the male energy as the best, the most dominant, but and I can't understand how people fall for that when evidence can stare you in the face that, okay, he's not that smart. He's not that smart. So we shouldn't listen to him just because he's male. You understand what I'm saying?
Well, I think that is part of, that's built into European religion, or the European aspect of religion. Christianity, in the creation story, even though Adam was admonished not to eat from the tree, which is confusing because at one point, God allegedly says to Adam, eat of the fruits of the garden. Well, then when Eve goes and picks a fruit and brings it back to Adam, and they share the fruit that they were told to eat, which was good, all of a sudden now they are punished for indiscretion. But the woman,
well, they said that he said don't eat this particular tree.
Right, from the tree of the tree of life, or the knowledge of good and evil. They the knowledge of good and evil. But
she wasn't supposed to be from this particular tree. This is how they changed it as time went on. It changes over time. If you look at the Gideon Bible, the old ancient Gideon Bible, if you look at other versions besides King James changed a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And there are older versions of those of it. I don't give. I'm sorry, it just befuddles me. But anyway, they're older versions, and
well, I know that there are some. There were some Bibles. I mean, the modern Bible has 66 books. There were some Bibles years ago, and I'm talking going back, when we were children, and everybody had the Bible with everybody's name and genealogy in it, the older Bibles.
Mm-hmm.
Some of those Bibles had actually 72 books. 6 of those books were removed over time for some reason.
Yes.
But that's another
story. You know why.
Right?
Come on, you know why. You know why. That way you won't know that the Catholic priest should be married.
Right. Right.
Because the test for them to become a Catholic priest was that they could control their home.
Right.
Their wives and the children were happy, and they could maintain a home. They had to be able to do that before they could become a priest. Now all of a sudden that disappeared.
Well, throughout history, it's pretty recent history that Catholic priests were not allowed to marry. This is something
exactly
they were allowed to marry and have families. That changed. But going back to the book of Genesis, right? So while both of them, Adam and Eve, committed an indiscretion, Eve received
was the one sanctioned,
punished, right?
Yes, she was sanctioned. Yes.
So they were banished, but now, according to Eve's punishment, childbirth would be painful, and that women would now have a menstrual cycle, which prior to supposedly did not happen. So sometimes I ask people, okay, so if you look at animals, right, the female of any species, when they are giving birth, they are in pain. Mm-hmm. It is clear. Well, if Eve is the one that sinned, why are the animals experiencing labor?
But I'd like to see you all push an 8-pound anything out of you and not have pain.
I get that.
I mean, just common sense. Just common sense.
Right. Supposedly, right. But supposedly prior to Eve, I guess, well, no one had ever been born on the planet.
Exactly.
Eve.
Exactly.
But since that time, right, the animals did not commit any sin. Animals follow their natural instinct and their pattern. Mm-hmm. why are the animals who did not commit sin, who did not eat the fruit, why is their labor painful if it was only supposed to be a punishment for Eve? So there is so many inconsistencies.
Well, if you're a thinking person, there's an inconsistency, my brother.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a thinking person, if you use logic and you say, well, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense over here. Let me find some more. Let me find out some more about this. If you're that kind of person, you're going to question and you're going to see the discrepancies and the inconsistencies and et cetera. And you're going to question. Your mind is not going to just accept. But if you're one that, I'm sorry to say, but we were punished into that. We were punished into just accepting what we were told. We were brutalized.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. Let's talk about that for a second.
Huh?
Let's talk about that for a second. Now, you said if you are a thinking person and you see the inconsistencies, if you are a thinking person and you see these inconsistencies, right, and you are a person that does some research, can you still consider yourself a Christian or a Muslim or even a Jew for that matter?
I know people who can, but they change stuff. That's what I'm saying. So, like, for instance, they changed the pronunciation of amen. Because I remember when I was little, nobody said amen. Everybody said amen. Because people were making the connection between amen, the deity, and that word. And so, well, now I changed it to amen. Well, it don't sound nothing like that. And people don't really read, so they don't see what the word looks like. And they don't know anything about the temple walls. And they don't know that that name existed in antiquity. That word existed in antiquity, and it was the name of an ancient being. And so this is what they do. They water stuff down, they chop it up, they put this little piece over here, they put that other piece over there. And if you ever get the wherewithal to put a couple of those pieces together, then they panic and they start changing stuff around again. Vision. Just so we hear. Sorry. Am I being bad today? They call it revision. You have to revise this and put out the new revised edition.
Well, you know something? These are conversations we need to have because so many of us do not know our history. We do not recognize when our history is being sold back to us. So in states like Texas, where they are rewriting history to say that Black people were never enslaved, that we came here as basically long-distance commuters in search of opportunity in America.
What opportunities? We had everything. We had water. We had rainforests where we could just go pick stuff to eat. You know, we had what opportunities were you offering that was better than where we live?
Well, you have to understand that if what you're going to do is change the narrative, and what we're doing in this country is something that they did in Nazi Germany and book burnings. So if you're going to destroy the actual books with the history, and you're going to now rewrite books to say that, listen, there was no transatlantic slave trade. What you had was Africans coming to the colonies in search of opportunity. Over time, what will happen is children who are being born will never come in contact with the actual history. All they will have is what you said, revisionist history that shows the slave trade did not exist. And that is what is happening in this country. So that's why it is important for us to go out and see movies like The Woman King, to understand our history. And again, sometimes
a lot of it won't be understood at a deep level, because if you don't have a few backstories, you'll see that and you'll be inspired by it, but you won't get the deep spiritual, historical meaning of it.
Right.
Am I making sense?
No, you are. You are.
Okay.
You are.
So, but if you read what they never told you in history class, that's a good start. If you read the African origin of civilization, ooh, ooh, this thing is backwards and flipped, and can't see I can't see on my little screen. Okay.
I see you. I see you.
If you read The Cult of the Black Virgin, oops, is it this?
I can see the book, yes.
And a whole bunch of other books I have somewhere that I took them somewhere, and I pray I brought them back home because a lot of them are out of print. You could get them. You'll have to pay a little more for them than I paid for them. And I want you to read also. I don't know if you could get this book anymore. The 5 Negro Presidents.
Yeah, I have that book at home. It's just
Yeah,
a small
but
book.
like
Yeah,
I
you
said,
can read it in a day.
Like
Yeah,
I said,
you read that in a day.
you read. That's different. I'm talking about people who never heard of it. I don't know. I'm talking about you. I don't know if you could get some of these books anymore because they have been purging. They have been purging all the books. Any book by Dr. John Hendrik Clark is good to read.
It's priceless.
Any book by Dr. Yosef Ben Yachaman, who we called fondly Dr. Ben. Any book by those two men. Any book by Sheikh Anta Diop. Name some other ones. My brain just fried.
Well, you know what? We would love to continue this conversation, but we have another show coming on, so we're going to have to revisit this at another time, and hopefully, Kwanzaa Mama, I can have you in studio at some point, so that you can actually see these books. We can hold them up on camera. People can actually see the books, and maybe we could open up the phone lines. And if people have any questions, they can call in and have you answer those questions. And we can talk about this more because it is so important. If we don't know our history, then we continue to be a lost people.
What I remember as a little girl, they told me, they said to us, I was a little girl and I'm almost 70 now. And they said, they were talking, actually, they weren't talking to the littlest ones. They were talking to the teenagers. And they said, watch your back. You better pay attention because these people will put your black back on the plantation if they get a chance. So pay attention. And I was so proud of the young people for doing the stay woke thing, but you didn't go far enough.
Well,
you didn't go far enough. We could talk about that another time. Just staying woke is not enough.
We'll have to pick up on that. But Kwanzaa Mama, thank you so much for
coming
on, joining me this morning. And as always, you're so insightful and wealth of information. So thank you so much for joining me this morning, and we'll definitely have you back again.
Thank you for waking me up.
Hotep, my sister.
Hotep.
So, folks, that was Kwanzaa Mama, and you were on the air with Ron and Romane. Hopefully, Romane will be back next week. And if you have questions or comments, don't hesitate to reach out to us at Romane's page, Real Romane. You can contact us on Facebook. I'm Ronald Gates on Facebook. You can email us, ronl1649@yahoo.com, with any comments, information you have regarding anything we said. And as the sister said, stay woke. So thank you for joining me, and peace.